Hello, everybody. Greeting from Heartcare Foundation of India and IJCP come MedTalks Group. I am Dr. K.K. Agarwal. Welcome to our interaction here. For me, it is 852nd interaction in the last 6 months on COVID-19. This interaction basically is based on the recent guidelines which Ministry of Health has come out about possibilities of co-infections with COVID-19. People are anticipating that in winter, number of cases may increase and confusion may increase in the management of COVID-19, whether it is COVID-19 or some other disorder. I have with me Professor Dr. Shashank Joshi, a Padma Shri awardee, a former president of Association of Physicians of India, endocrinologist, physician, done extensive work in the field of COVID in Maharashtra. Both of us will be interacting. Initially, we thought that it will be a lecture, but we thought that instead of a lecture, let's interact with each other based on the practical points. Because the winter is already on, we are starting getting mixed and co-infections. So we will be interacting with us based on certain points which I have noted down on certain slides. So Dr. Shashank Joshi, normally we say when a viral infection comes, this viral infection or any vaccine will produce an innate immunity, will produce interferon 1A, which will prevent from a subsequent viral infection. So normally we say that once you get an infection, you get protection from another virus for few months. That's the basis of vaccine and that's the basis of BCG and that's the basis of MMR, that if you give any vaccine or a natural infection, it will produce interferon 1A, which will give you immunity for 3 months. But in COVID-19, this is not happening. Dr. Joshi.
That is very true, Dr. Saab, because in COVID is a predictably unpredictable virus, and it is we don't know whether it is a true virus or a pseudo virus. Three things are very clear cut. Number one is that the classical interferon response is not seen. Number two, there is a lot of inflammatory response, not just a immunological response. And many a times the inflammatory response and the hyperinflammatory response is much more robust than actually the immunological response. So there is a discordance which is seen in COVID, which is not seen with other viral flus like flu or even H1N1 or other infections which you would get. And that is a variance to normal things. And probably in an RNA virus like SARS-CoV-2 virus, probably the T cell and the T memory cells, how they get activated is an enigma to us. We are only understanding the natural history better as we have entered COVID in the third season, I would say. Though we are in the 6th month of COVID, we are in the season. First, we started with summer, then we had monsoon, and now we are entering into winter. So technically, spring is also a season. So actually, COVID came in spring to us, lasted the summer. From summer, moved into really the monsoon, where it peaked because of the moisture probably. And now we are entering into winter, which has got very dense particulate matter, particularly in north of India with the smog there. And of course, the typical innate response which you are saying, sir, is very true. The interferon 1, interferon gamma is not classical. And I would say there's an atypical immunological response in the COVID biology. And as we understand better, you know that better also.
So the first lesson is that after COVID-19, you may not get a protection because COVID capsular and capsular protein may not produce enough interferon or may produce a delayed interferon. But the contrary may not be true. That means if you take BCG or a MMR vaccine, it may still protect you. I said may. Therefore, trials are going on BCG and MMR. Two trials are going on, that is on recombinant BCG or a live BCG vaccine. Whether BCG and MMR would protect you is a query, but definitely if you get COVID, it may not protect you from other associated infections for the next 3 months. Can I come back to the first slide? Now, Dr. Shashank Joshi has clearly said that this is a fever plus cytokine fever. So there are two fevers occurring in this condition: inflammatory fever, which is a cytokine fever, and it is also causing a fever because of the virus. The virus as a exogenous fever, which is a exogenous fever because of the virus, and there is also a inflammatory fever. And in this inflammatory fever, we have interleukins and we have TNF blocker. So TNF alpha is a local reaction, and then comes interleukin 1 beta, 6 and 8 and 18. And remember that interleukin 10 is just the opposite. Interleukin 10 is the protective phenomena. It is like a protection. So what we want is any drug, any herb, or any lifestyle which increases IL-10 and reduces IL-1 beta, IL-6 and TNF. And NLRP automatically, indirectly produces interleukins. So our objective is to find a lifestyle. Exercise reduces IL-6. Stress management reduces IL-6. Haldi, adrak reduces IL-1 beta, IL-6. They also reduces TNF alpha. Zinc also reduces at these particular levels. Now let us see, before we go back to each fever, what are the drugs which we can use in this COVID, because this is no more a simple fever, it is fever with inflammation. So we have paracetamol, naproxen, indomethacin, mefenamic acid, and nimesulide. And if you say only three drugs reduces TNF alpha, that is naproxen, mefenamic acid, and nimesulide. So therefore, the drug of choice here will be a choice between naproxen, mefenamic acid, and TNF alpha. Indomethacin increases IL-1 beta, which is the main cause of fever. IL-6 is reduced by all. IL-6 is reduced by all, so you can choose as far as IL-6 is concerned. IL-8, nobody acts on IL-8. And then we come back to TNF alpha, which is reduced by mefenamic acid, paracetamol, and nimesulide. So again here, mefenamic acid and nimesulide are the two choices which reduces all aspects. NLRP is reduced only by mefenamic acid and nimesulide. Now see here that IL-10 reduced by paracetamol and indomethacin. IL-10 you can say HDL cholesterol, IL-1 beta you can say LDL cholesterol. This is how you can remember. So IL-10 is increased by nimesulide. So if we have to find out the drug of choice in this condition, if it is 0 to 14 days, nimesulide and mefenamic acid. If it is more than 14 days, then mefenamic acid. So this is how the action of this drug in inflammation takes place. If you want rapid action, nimesulide. If you want slow action, mefenamic acid. If you want to give a drug for 3 months, obviously you cannot give nimesulide because that is not approved for more than 14 days. If you want to give it in children, mefenamic acid. Otherwise, in acute phase, nimesulide and mefenamic acid are comparable to each other. Dr. Joshi.
So I completely agree with you, Dr. Three things. Number one, there is a lot of inflammation and hyperinflammation. So there are good cytokines and bad cytokines. As Dr. Agarwal has very nicely pointed out, the good cytokine is the IL-10. So what boosts IL-10? Well, beyond reasonable doubt, there is a increase of IL-10 by nimesulide. And we know that actually there is a counterproductive action of paracetamol and indomethacin. So the good cytokine is upregulated by nimesulide and downregulated by paracetamol and indomethacin, therefore should be avoided. When it comes to the bad cytokines, we have fundamentally the IL-6, the TNF alpha. The IL-6 is universally reduced by everybody. But when it comes to TNF alpha, naproxen actually is counterproductive. It increases it. And nimesulide decreases it, mefenamic acid decreases it, and paracetamol decreases it. So though paracetamol may be a good antipyretic, it is not an excellent anti inflammatory. In fact, it might actually make the good cytokine go up, and that is not something which we want. Go down, sorry. So paracetamol is good for reduction of fever, but when the fever has a large inflammatory response, despite of giving what we call as paracetamol resistant fever, is because of inflammation. And that is where mefenamic acid and nimesulide, and particularly nimesulide, has an added advantage on controlling the inflammatory syndrome or the post-COVID inflammatory syndrome. And this inflammatory syndrome needs the bad cytokines to go down, the good cytokines to go up. And that's where these drugs have niched themselves in. And that's something for us to recognize. There are even simple things, as Dr. Agarwal said, good exercise will upregulate the good cytokine. We also know that if you sleep from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock at night, the IL-10 and IL-12 goes up, which is again a good cytokine. So remember, your cytokines can be good or bad, which are the chemicals which are made by our immune system. And there are drugs which are anti-inflammatory drugs which can have a very beneficial effect, particularly in the lingering phenomenon which we see with COVID. Now, the predominant problem in COVID is not in the first 7 days. It is in the second 7 days where the inflammation is predominant. The cytokine storm is very high. And that's the time, if you give appropriately after 5 days, drugs like nimesulide, drugs like mefenamic acid, you can actually dent this whole cytokine biology and make a change. So the immunological switching, which occurs with anti-inflammatory drugs like nimesulide, is something very welcome. And that is something which we need to keep in mind in the COVID era. Sir.
So this slide, which I have shown, is courtesy Dr. R.K. Sanghavi, who is an expert on cytokines, and I invited him in one of the lecture in the evening. So I have taken the permission of showing this particular slide. Can I have the next slide, please? Next. Now we come back to various types of fevers. I will come back to COVID again in the last, because that's of interest to everybody. Can I get a COVID as a reinfection? That means two COVID infections at the same time. That I will take it in the last. But at the moment, I will first take dengue and chikungunya. There are cases coming of dengue with COVID actively. That means you can have, while you are suffering from COVID, you develop dengue. Second is that your virus is non-replicative after 9 days. And the next 90 days, you develop dengue. And the third is after 90 days, you develop dengue. These are the three situations. We all know dengue is of four types: dengue 1, den 2, den 3, and den 4. We also know den 2 and den 4 causes more cytokine reactions. We also know dengue also causes high CRP, as we get a CRP high in corona. Dengue also causes hypercoagulable state. Therefore, a combination of dengue and corona may be deadly. And we know dengue as rising hematocrit with falling platelets. And we talk about, when it comes to corona, we say acute rise in CRP. That's what we take. We try to differentiate the two. We basically about dengue as a formula of 20. That means if you develop rapid rise in pulse rate by more than 20, rapid fall of upper blood pressure by 20, if your pulse pressure is less than 20, if there is a rapid fall of platelet to less than 20,000 simultaneously with acute rise in hematocrit by 20%, if your tourniquet test shows 20 PTK per inch, you are dealing with a severe dengue. That means there is a leakage of endothelial leakage. There is intravascular dehydration and extravascular fluid accumulation. Immediately take 20 ml of fluid per kg body weight stat. And if you do not pass your urine in the next 1 hour, continue taking high amount of liquid till you pass urine and then reach a hospital. Now, these are certain points. My question to Dr. Shashank is, once we know that dengue is hypercoagulable, it causes intravascular coagulation because of dehydration, intravascular dehydration. And COVID also causes increased hypercoagulation. In the virtuous triad, this gets added in that particular situation. How important it is to differentiate, diagnose, or pick up dengue, and very well knowing that NS1 antigen can be falsely positive in corona 19.
So this is a very, very crucial point. In fact, last year in the month of July and August, Mumbai is one of the dengue capitals of India. And our hospitals last year in June and August were full with dengue, and we never got a single bed. And this year, surprisingly, we had more monsoon than last year, but suddenly dengue had evaporated because of the COVID season. But there are two interesting phenomena. We have seen an admixture of COVID with dengue, which is far more sinister and far more inappropriate. So there are a lot of similarities, as Dr. Agarwal said. Dengue will have a coagulopathy which is similar to that of COVID. But in COVID coagulopathy, it is more of a thrombotic phenomenon, while in dengue coagulopathy, it is more of a platelet phenomenon. So the difference between the hematological profile of dengue and the hematological profile of COVID is very hematologically thrombocytopenia and thrombosis. That's how I would distinguish that there are two T's of the dengue thrombocytopenia and the COVID thrombosis. That's how I would distinguish. But accidentally, a lot of cytokines got done in fever profile in the city of Mumbai because we had Vivax malaria, we had dengue and COVID, all three coming together in monsoon, which is just still not gone actually. As I talked to you, Dr. Agarwal, we still are having thunderstorms in Mumbai. And therefore, it is very important to recognize how do you distinguish a dengue tropical and a COVID, which is pandemic. So that became a challenge for us. And in that, when cytokines were done, we actually saw whatever is seen in COVID is also seen in dengue. For example, the IL-6 goes up, the TNF alpha goes up. So the whole cytokine syndrome and the coagulopathy syndrome is very similar in dengue and COVID. The only exception is the platelets dramatically come down in dengue. The leaky capillaries are much more deleterious in severe dengue, and that is more of a microthrombi, which is a phenomenon with COVID. So, as far as the inflammatory component is concerned, and the anti-inflammatory component is concerned, dengue and COVID have similarities, and even their management strategies can be similar. So that's what I would like to talk about dengue. But surprisingly, I'm certain even in Delhi this year we did not see as much of dengue with COVID, and whenever we saw, we have actually lost cases. We actually lost 4 cases in the whole season due to dual infection of dengue and COVID. But this number we had predicted to be much larger, but probably because of better cleanliness, better hygiene quotient, somehow or the other, we escaped dengue this year, and which is a good thing.
One of
Dr.
the
Agarwal.
clinical clue is that in corona we have low grade fever, and if in corona if you have a high grade fever, invariably pneumonia is present. So if you have corona positive and if you see fever is more than 101 and pneumonia is not there, start looking for associated some other infection. If the TLC is low, platelets are coming down, you can think of dengue as a possibility, but always go for an ELISA test, not a spot test, because spot test, typhoid dot and NS1 spot test may become falsely positive with corona. Coming back to chikungunya.
So one more point I wanted to make. Sorry, I'm interrupting. I just remembered that the complete blood count gives you a good insight between COVID and dengue. For severe prediction of COVID versus severe prediction of dengue, if the red cell width and the neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio is elevated, it is more likely to be COVID. And if the platelets are dwindling below a lakh or 80,000, it is more likely with a normal RDW, it is more likely to be COVID. So from a simple CBC itself, you can get a reasonable insight whether it is COVID or dengue. And sometimes, as you rightly said, it could be a co-infection.
So remember the number 14.5. If your RDW is more than 14.5, that's a sign you are maybe dealing with a corona illness. So remember the word 14.5. And also remember that in COVID, you get at least 1 to 2 grams of hemoglobin loss because of inflammation. And that may not be there in dengue so much. Coming back to chikungunya, remember it is not chicken, it is chikun. The word chikun comes from a posture, that is a posture inflection, a joint pain which gets improved on a flexion posture. Cannot be mixed with corona because corona spares the joints. The peripheral joints are spared. Corona may still have a spondyloarthritis type of a pain, which is a back pain, which is seen in HLA 27 type of a pain it may have. But definitely, corona doesn't have a peripheral pains unless it is a very severe corona. Chikungunya cannot be missed. A person will come walking with a severe arthritis in a flex position, sitting on a wheelchair in a flex position, may have a post-viral phase, like we have a post-corona phase. Similarly, in chikungunya, the post-viral phase may last for a year, and patient may have recurrent joint pains. And characteristically, the rash is there. The rash in corona may last only for a day or two, but in chikungunya, the rash is more prominent and may last. I have not seen chikungunya with COVID, but let's try to see whether Professor Joshi has seen any case of chikungunya with COVID.
So we have not seen any case of chikungunya with COVID at all. And you're absolutely right, sir, that a chikungunya patient is weeping and crying with excruciating pain, which is not seen in a typical COVID syndrome. COVID does get some amount of spondyloarthropathy. They get typically below knee joint, they will get severe cramps, and the cramps are more than the pain. While in chikungunya, the pain is more than the cramps. So that's the way it is. In dengue, it is more of the bone pains. In chikungunya, it is more of the joint pains and it is more of the arthralgia, which is sometimes very debilitating. And most of the chikungunya patients often come to us on a wheelchair. We are weeping, crying, and they probably are getting the worst pain of their life. Again, it's like a cytokine. It's like a chronic cytopathy, I call it, the chikungunya syndrome, the post-viral syndrome. And where you, sir, very rightly said, it is the skin which distinguishes chikungunya from all other, similar chronic inflammatory syndromes which we see often in rheumatological practice or clinical medicine or infectious diseases.
So when there is a pain in the joints, you need an anti-inflammatory. Again, you have choices: a paracetamol, mefenamic acid, or you have here indomethacin can also come into the picture, or nimesulide. For acute pain, nimesulide will try to compete with other drugs. But if you need to give a drug for 3 months, here indomethacin may take over other drugs because long-term use indomethacin may take over. But for 3 months, you can still give mefenamic acid. But for first 7 days, nimesulide, because of a quicker action, may respond. Next.
So just a point here, sir. I normally prefer to give nimesulide in the first week of 15 days and then move them and switch them to another agent like a mefenamic acid or indomethacin. I sometimes tend to nowadays prefer more of mefenamic acid after 2 weeks of nimesulide, and actually the results are dramatic. Sometimes what happens if you start de novo mefenamic acid or indomethacin, the response is only 50%. So if you want that responder rate to improve from 50% to almost 80 or 90%, sometimes it is worthwhile adding a nimesulide there. Just a small point, sorry.
Nimesulide, as per DCGI, is approved for given up to 15 days. People say that it can be given for more than 15 days, but we are sticking here to DCGI recommendation of 15 days. Next. Then we come back to flu and Zika. The Zika and flu both come into differential diagnosis of corona, because corona has a corona-like illness, and flu, we call them as influenza-like illness. So today we are shifting ILI to CLI, corona-like illness. Both may have nasal involvement, but Zika will have predominantly conjunctivitis. Zika conjunctivitis, suddenly we remember that corona also has conjunctivitis. But Zika will have bilateral ear involvement, and in COVID conjunctivitis, somehow, we don't understand the reason, we see more of a left eye conjunctivitis. Fever will remain the same, but yes, if you have predominant eye involvement bilateral, also consider Zika into the picture, specifically if you are dealing with a pregnant case. But when it comes to flu, it will be predominantly nasal, but without loss of smell, without loss of taste, and the fever in flu will be higher, more than 100.4. In corona, it will be less than 100.4. Dr. Joshi.
So, sir, this is a big thing. As we approach winter, the biggest diagnostic dilemma physicians will face across India and across the world, including United States, is it flu? Is it COVID? Is it flu? Is it COVID? And very rightfully said that there is a lot of nasal involvement in both of them. but the distinguishing feature will be smell and taste is lost in COVID, which is intact in flu, number one. Number two, the temperature, I call it the 100, below 100, usually COVID, above 100, usually flu. Three, the excruciating body pains are much more prominent with flu, while it is much lesser in the COVID type of illness. And four, the dry cough, which is hacking, is much more present in COVID and probably is much lesser with flu. When it comes to the inflammatory component, probably COVID has a larger inflammatory component and flu has more of an allergic component. So one is inflammatory, one is allergic. Flu predominates on the allergy front, while COVID predominates on the inflammatory front. So these are just some semantics. Of course, it is individualized decision making. And also with flu, the likelihood of secondary infection with productive cough is higher, while in COVID, usually there is non-productive cough.
So we can also remember that this is the time to take flu vaccine. October is the best time. Take a flu vaccine. Maybe it may protect you from corona also. So don't forget to take flu vaccine, specifically if you have a high risk. My definition of high risk is if your CRP is more than 1, if you have a mild grade underlying inflammation, you are at a high risk of cytokines. Next. We come back to malaria and filaria. Filaria, we see more in Nagpur, Maharashtra, and areas from where Dr. Joshi comes. We can have malaria and filaria. Both can have fever with chills. Malaria comes in the afternoon. Filaria comes in the evening. Both needs to be treated. Filaria can end up into its own complications. And if filaria is existing, can end up into a tropical pulmonary eosinophilia. Both have fever, chills, and rigors. One is in the day, one is in the evening. Malaria is characteristically of a headache. Now, these disorders need to be differentiated with each other and also need to be differentiated in the COVID era if they are coexistent. Dr. Joshi.
So we had a huge peak of Vivax malaria with COVID recently in the last 2 to 3 months in the city of Mumbai. And malaria is a big mimic. Sometimes you may have no fever, sometimes you may have very high grade fever up to 105, sometimes you may have chills and rigors, sometimes you may not have any chills and rigors. Even chills and rigors are now a symptom of COVID. So malaria becomes, but malaria is a day fever. As you rightly said, rarely malaria is nocturnal or evening, while filaria is predominantly evening or nocturnal. And filaria basically has a fever which starts around 5 or 6 and peaks by around midnight. While malaria is typically, as you work more, you start having a graded increase in temperature. So that's how it is. It's very difficult to distinguish the two. But if you have a headache, if you have anything which is having a neuromuscular symptomatology, the malarial diagnosis is higher. And if there is no absence of neuromuscular etiology, filarial diagnosis is higher. Filaria is uncommon now, even in Maharashtra and Mumbai. It is gradually on the decline, but it is not uncommon. Sometimes you need to really, do the lymphatic system examination, the lymph nodes. You can have a tender cervical lymph node. You can have a tender inguinal lymph node. Sometimes you need to also ensure that you can get a little bit of in the male gonads. You might have some gonadal involvement. So, and you can also get the legs involved. So this is something which we see, but filariasis is increasingly getting more and more common. And filarial, syndrome is much lesser. Malaria, however, is very unpredictable, particularly Vivax malaria. Vivax malaria, sometimes the fever can come every third day. Sometimes it can come every fourth day. And that can be very, very tricky. So if somebody is getting fever on and off, actually you tend to land up with multiple antibiotics. And we know that Vivax malaria is a big mimic because it needs a proper medication for a good 14 days with a proper prophylaxis. So that's something which we need to recognize. Every malaria is not necessarily a falciparum malaria. Falciparum malaria tends to be severe and a little dull headache with chills and rigors, where the rigors predominate, and a predictably unpredictable fever is malaria. While the COVID fever is again exertional, more in the evening, and is reasonably predictable. Now, usually COVID between day 8 to day 12 sometimes can get high grade fever, but most of the time COVID fever tends to be below 101, 102. Malarial fever, as I said, is a big mimic because currently it is impossible sometimes to distinguish malaria till we get a proper smear and also never forget Vivax.
So Vivax is something which we have not yet seen resistance to Vivax malaria. It's treatable, and anything which is treatable fever should be always ruled out. Next. Next slide, Ritu. So I come back to leptospirosis, which is much more common in Mumbai, and we don't see that much of leptospirosis. In Delhi, we see more of a typhus as an unusual fever. So we'll pick up both leptospirosis and typhus here. Dr. Joshi.
So leptospira is quite rampant in Mumbai because we get wet and our legs get wet in the monsoons and the water puddles. And doxycycline is a drug of choice. And leptospiral fever, if treated appropriately and quickly and fast, you can otherwise get, these typical, ictohemorrhagic, as they say, which is basically ictus means jaundice, and you get a lot of bleeding, and it affects the liver and the kidney. So leptospirosis, if appropriately attacked and treated, whenever there is a shower of monsoon, is very, very amenable to treatment. Unfortunately, this time we also saw a lot of leptospira with COVID. And with COVID, leptospira is a very bad combination. In fact, at Sion and KM Hospital, we lost a few cases because of a dual combination of leptospira and COVID, because it's a double whammy, because multi-organ failure is the order of the day when you get a dual infection of leptospirosis and COVID, because COVID blows up the lungs and the heart, while leptospirosis blows. So one is above the diaphragm, one is below the diaphragm, as they say. And leptospirosis typically is below the diaphragm. And as I said, leptospirosis is very treatable. One of the reasons in Mumbai from day one, we were fascinated with doxycycline. In fact, much before the hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin regimen, somewhere in mid-May only, we replaced it with doxycycline and hydroxychloroquine, predominantly because we did not want the leptospiral, attacking our slum population. And later on, of course, we made a doxy-ivermectin regimen. And in the doxy-ivermectin regimen, lepto gets very well covered. So that's something which we need to recognize. That doxycycline, it's a leptospirosis, if treated early, is a very treatable condition.
What about typhus, scrub typhus?
So scrub typhus is unusual. It can be seen, in Delhi, but we also see it in Mumbai. And again, as I said, you need to get appropriate antimicrobial policies. Now, lot of leptospira, scrub typhus are linked to hygiene. And we need a high index of suspicion, because many a times, if we do not have a high index of suspicion, you can miss it. Often leptospirosis can present with muscle pain, which is very acute, like myositis, and with jaundice. So if you see jaundice, you need to red flag a leptospirosis. Similarly, it is true for the typhus. Typhus, I would in fact ask you, Dr. Agarwal, to describe your Delhi experience, because you see typhus far more than what we see in Mumbai. We see leptospira far more than what you all see probably in Delhi.
One is that whenever you have fever, doxycycline gives you malaria, dengue, it gives you COVID, it gives you leptospira, and it gives you typhus cover. So when you are in doubt, start doxycycline. That's one. Number two is whenever you have a person, always look for a fever, for a scar in the leg. And if you see something like a black mark on the leg, immediately look for a lymph node in the inguinal region. If it is positive, this is diagnostic of scrub fever. So scrub typhus basically is a fever with a lymph node enlargement. And wherever there is a lymph node, if it is axillary, you look for a scar here. And if it is inguinal, look for a black spot on the legs. And this is very easy. And if it is untreated, you can end up into an encephalitis. And remember, in Muzaffarpur, encephalitis in children, 50% of them were scrub typhus encephalitis. If not treated in time, you can kill. And if treated in time, like leptospirosis, it takes care of everything. Can we go to the next? Then with that, we will also cover typhoid. With the typhus, we'll also cover typhoid. Typhoid, remember one thing in COVID era, that typhoid test is false positive in every case of corona. Therefore, go for blood culture. Unless it is a blood culture positive, do not treat it as a typhoid fever. We have seen couple of deaths in Delhi where they missed the diagnosis of corona, husband positive, wife corona negative, typhoid positive, and they started saying this is typhoid. No, They missed the bus, ended up into a cytokine crisis, and the patient died. So remember one thing, typhoid is a very high grade fever. Patient is toxic. And here in corona, patient is not toxic at all. He is cheerful. Therefore, we call them as happy hypoxia. He is happy. He is cheerful. Fever is less. Fever is intermittent. Fever is low grade. So never miss. Corona cannot be missed with typhoid. And today's session is only if you have corona positive with a fever, which is unusual, not typical of corona, then you look for associated symptoms. Typhoid, a secondary infection in corona, can also come, requires an antibiotics. Dr. Shashank.
I completely agree with you. In fact, we also see in Mumbai a lot of typhoid with COVID, and often there's a misdiagnosis because always do a bacterial culture, and blood culture is the way to go for systemic salmonellosis. And clearly, we know that appropriate antibiotics can do wonders in in typhoid. The other thing which you need to recognize is typhoid sometimes doesn't go away, and it has a stool carrier. There is a similarity between typhoid presentation and the gastrointestinal variant of COVID, because we know COVID also sometimes can present with diarrhea and can have a stool PCR which is positive. And typhoid also can linger in the gallbladder, in the bile, and in the gut. So you need to recognize that typhoid is very, very treatable condition. We also have a vaccination available, and it is all again linked to food and water. So if you are able to ensure that there is appropriate decontamination, cleanliness which is observed, we can prevent a lot of typhoid, and also vaccination is possible because that vaccination is available now. Typhoid is not something which we should miss in COVID times. And the bigger challenge is most people, when they look at a Vidal or a Typhi, never miss a COVID storm, because that is the bigger danger. In fact, most of them don't have typhoid at all. Most of them have just a mild form of COVID, and that's something which we need to recognize. The other thing about typhoid is we have also seen in COVID times, somebody was told that, I saw the other extreme, Dr. Agarwal, in Mumbai. Somebody was told that this is COVID and was treated for COVID, and after 6 weeks came with an enteric perforation and ultimately was found to have typhoid. So, because patient was treated like a sari, like COVID, and went home and landed up back in a hospital with a intestinal perforation to find out that the patient originally had typhoid. So we have seen both the spectrums. You lost a patient due to COVID storm because there was a false positive typhoid test, and people thought it was typhoid. While on the other hand, we thought that this was COVID because the typhoid test was positive, was actually typhoid, and landed up with intestinal perforation. So we can see both the extremes, and therefore high index of clinical suspicion is very, very crucial when we are distinguishing these type of microbial fevers in COVID time, because COVID is a mimic and other fevers are equally a mimic. So you need to be very, very persistent, individualized, and focused in your management.
So two lessons from typhoid. One is vaccine. Once you know that typhoid can confuse, why not go for a vaccine? May give you some immunity for COVID-19 also today. And the number two thing is blood culture, and blood culture. Always do a blood culture whenever you are dealing with a fever with that. Coming back to some unusual causes of fever. We have a liver abscess. Sometimes we have a TLC more than 15,000. You hit on the liver area, it's painful, and the patient may have fever with chills and rigors. Cholangitis may have fever with chills and rigors. UTI may have fever with chills and rigors. Now, why I have added this slide into this is because there is also a COVID cystitis. Classically, 50 to 60% no bacteria, culture negative, responds to mefenamic acid or nimesulide. That is called as a COVID cystitis. You also can have a COVID hepatitis where bilirubin may be less than 5, SGOT, SGPT may rise to less than 5 times. If it is more than 5 times, look for something else. And bilirubin, if it is more than 5, look for something else. You may have a COVID hepatitis. You may have COVID cholecystitis, which is inflammatory cholecystitis. You can have a COVID appendicitis, which is a inflammatory appendicitis without any obstruction. These are the people where they respond to the painkillers, nimesulide, mefenamic acid, etc., and steroids if the patient also has a pneumonia in such cases. Therefore, I wanted to bring this. Now, remember, in UTI, you will have fever with chills and rigors. Rigors presence usually, predominant rigors rules out COVID. COVID basically has more of chills, less of rigors. If you have more of rigors, think of malaria or think of uh, the bacterial infections in such particular thing. So therefore, if you have chills, signs of UTI, 50 to 100 pus cells, and the bacteria are absent, look for a COVID cystitis there. Dr. Shashank.
So I would completely agree with you here. What we have actually seen is something very unique and interesting. Most patients after COVID, when they are recovering, particularly when they are hospitalized, when they are on high dose of steroids, and particularly if they are diabetics, they are landing with a bad pyelonephritis, in fact, renal abscesses and liver abscesses. And usually, I'm seeing these patients who have received particularly this tocilizumab with a lot of steroids, and usually, they are in the hospital for in the third and the fourth week of the disease, and they come home and then they start getting suddenly very high grade fever with chills and rigors. WBC count is 22,000, and lo behold, we did a sonography, found that there was a liver abscess. In another case, recently we found 2 weeks back that patient had COVID, a patient recovered, was on a ventilator, was given high dose of steroids with tocilizumab, and came out of the ventilator, went home. In the 6th week, started getting only acute headache, nausea, vomiting, and fever up to 105, and had almost more than 100 per cells. On sonography showed acute pyelonephritis. So remember that because we are using immunologics and steroids post COVID, usually post COVID syndrome, beyond inflammation, you can actually get infection and abscesses, which we need to be careful, because when you are doing severe immunosuppression with steroids, this is something which you'll expect. And both the patients were diabetics, so you need to be more cautious and careful in your comorbid conditions.
So coming back to the last, can we have the next slide? If not, take the viewers off. Yes. Can we have the picture? Now we come back to COVID with COVID. That means two people staying together. Can they cross infect each other? Can COVID reinfect? In Bombay, we have seen in 40 days. Otherwise, we have seen after 30 or 90 days. That means what are the chances of co-infection with two COVID at the same time? Or what are the chances of getting a COVID infection after you have recovered from the first? This is all dependent upon the strain of the COVID, the second strain of COVID, but it is not like dengue, which are four different distinct type of viruses, Den 1, Den 2, Den 3, Den 4. But here we have the same virus, but with slightly different genes with a mutation, like D614 gene. So therefore, two different strains of virus, can they co-infect at the same time? That's the first question. The second question is that if I am developing a coronavirus, can I get another type of a coronavirus which are normally present in the circulation and causes common cold? Dr. Joshi.
So your question is very important for healthcare workers or doctors. All the reinfection cases which we have seen are in healthcare workers which are living in high viral load environments or COVID care places. So there is a sense of complacency which comes in after you recover from COVID. And if you do not follow COVID appropriate behavior, do not do appropriate masking, do not take universal biosafety guidelines, you are in for trouble. So one thing is very clear cut, that reinfection, though exceedingly rare, is a clear cut visible phenomenon. As you rightfully stated, if you do a genomic analysis, both the strains are different. Whether the first infection will be severe or the second infection will be severe, we don't know. We have a case of a resident doctor who recovered from COVID storm, was hospitalized the first time, actually came back to his duty, got a antibody titer done. Actually, after the antibody titer was done, gave blood for plasma, and plasma donation was given. And after 3 weeks of plasma donation, actually again got an infection. Genomic analysis was done and had a second infection, had a full-blown syndrome of COVID right up to hospitalization, but no ventilator, and has recovered. Now, obviously, this is one of those published cases which got published. Around 8 cases were there. Most of the cases we have seen are doctors or nurses or healthcare workers. So outside that space, to see a reinfection is exceedingly rare. So it is not that it is uncommon, but it is exceedingly rare. But we need to understand that reinfection is a real phenomenon. It can occasionally occur, rarely. It is very difficult to prove it. The other thing which we may see and which we need to recognize, Dr. Agarwal, is very interesting. We also might have a reactivation of the old virus. Now, we know that COVID is predominantly sitting in the ACE2 receptors in the alveolus or type 2 pneumocytes or the heart. But we know there are other hidden reservoirs of COVID. And I am told the main have a reservoir in the testicles. There is a gut reservoir. And many a times when you get a COVID infection, and in fact, NIRR, which is ICMR Institute in Bombay, they are doing stool PCRs, because we know that if there is a gut reservoir or a testicular reservoir or a gonadal reservoir, including an ovarian reservoir, that could be a potential reservoir. Remember, pancreas, kidneys, liver, gonads, and gut, all of them can harbor the virus, and you might become absolutely okay, and there may be a reactivation. So whether it is reinfection or reactivation, now reactivation is not in published literature. You will see that coming up also, but keep that also in mind that sometimes there could be a reactivation from a sanctuary site. Now, in HIV, we understood sanctuary site was a lymph node. In COVID, we have not understood the sanctuary site. This is rare. This is less than 5%, and reinfection is rarest of. So in the rarest of rare, we should be a little cautious and careful, but we should not be complacent. And also in reinfection, never forget reactivation. The other question which a lot of people ask is, what about antibodies? Do antibodies give me a surrogate? That I had high antibodies, I gave plasma, still I got COVID. Yes, you can still get reinfection, because you see, if there is a different genome and there might be a memory and a robust response, we don't know whether your second infection will be less or not. That only time will tell. In fact, this season, in winter, it will be very unique to see people who got the summer COVID. They have bypassed monsoons without any reinfection. In winter, particularly in the month of January, February, will they get the second infection? That is something which world is watching now, not only for India, but rest of the world. And we'll see that happening. We're already seeing a second spike happening in Europe and US. And I'm sure already temperatures in Delhi must be down now. And as the temperatures will dwindle, you will see that second peak. You will probably see reinfection, stroke reactivation. Be alert for both, be vigilant for both. But remember, it's extraordinarily rare.
So I want to come back to one more thing, and that is multisystem inflammatory disease. It was seen in children, it was seen in adolescents. Now CDC says it is also seen in adults.
Right.
My own analysis, I want to give an hypothesis where I want the views of Professor Joshi. So I say, like you have a rheumatoid arthritis, articular and extra-articular. Similarly, this disease is pulmonary and extrapulmonary. So therefore, you have two types of COVID, pulmonary and extrapulmonary. Pulmonary is TNF alpha induced, which is local, and extrapulmonary is more interleukins based. Both of them are there each other, but that's more of a remote humoral response. So you have different types of situations. You have mild pulmonary and a mild extrapulmonary, patient becomes all right. You have a mild pulmonary with a predominantly extrapulmonary, that patients may have the loss of smell, loss of taste, diarrhea as the primary presentation. Pulmonary presentation may be mild and they may recover. Then you have a more pulmonary and less of extrapulmonary. That these are the acute responses. Then comes a response after 2 months, after 30 days, 40 days, 50 days, 60 days, where you have predominant extrapulmonary response with a mild response in pulmonary. And when we say extra pulmonary response, more of IL-6, you get very high grade fever because of IL-1 beta and IL-8, very high grade fever. You have involvement of 5 different parts of the body: the skin, the eyes, the stomach, that means small intestine, and then you have involvement of the heart. And these are the areas where you get involvement. So involvement of the eye and the skin on one side, and then you have involvement of the small intestine, and then you have involvement of the blood and the liver and the involvement of the heart. And they say if 1 or 2 of these 5 organs are involved, you have a multi-system inflammatory. Now, these are the cases where antibodies are positive. Now, these are the cases probably where Professor Joshi is talking about that either they may be reinfection, reactivation, either reactivation of the virus or reactivation of the inflammatory response due to some other external stimuli. May not be corona alone. So these are reactivation of the virus or reactivation of the inflammatory response in the presence of the antibodies, and that can cause multi-system inflammatory disease now seen in adults also. Dr. Joshi.
So you are very right, sir. So you need the initial pulmonary syndrome of COVID is a locking in of the type 2 pneumocyte, or it's a very alveolar phenomenon or air sac phenomenon. While the extra pulmonary syndrome is something which is thromboinflammatory syndrome. And that thromboinflammatory syndrome is most typically seen, and this is documented by autopsies all over the world, by endothelitis. In fact, when they have taken the endothelium, which is the largest organ of the body, and that is what you rightfully said, the multi-system extrapulmonary syndrome of COVID is nothing but a form first a variant of endothelitis. And they have actually demonstrated now in necropsies and autopsies, in the endothelium, SARS-CoV-2 virons. So they've actually documented that in autopsy studies. And I think, Dr. Agarwal, today I will send you on a WhatsApp a picture, very good illustrations of these slides where you can actually see this. And that is why you said that the manifestations you get in these 5 organs are nothing but endothelitis. And endothelitis is now a very well documented entity in the COVID space, where there is immunothromboinflammatory phase, and it can at times linger for a very long time, which we call as protracted time. And therefore, this long COVID could be linked to this. Long COVID again has 2-3 types. One is, of course, a neurological involvement, which is called as an escape phenomenon. Then, of course, is the other long COVID, which is predominantly seen as the fibrotic version, which is the end stage lung disease, which is seen. And third is this endothelitis, which is now coming up as a multi-system disease, as you rightfully said. So in the long COVID, we have these 3 variants which are now emerging. And the escape variant neurological can be completely different. You can get a stroke, you can get a meningoencephalitis, you can get, and we are seeing that. You can get a severe form of a Guillain-Barré syndrome, you can get AIDP, you can get CIDP. So neurological is escape. Endothelitis is the multi-system state which you are saying, which can be protracted even up to 6 months, they say. But of course, we have not seen that long a time to see that involvement. And of course, third is the end stage disease left due to the war, which is predominantly lung being the site, the fibrosis. There is going to be a tsunami of lung fibrosis. And a lot of people, and I don't know, Dr. Agarwal, how many you are seeing in Delhi, but in Mumbai, a lot of people, even after post-COVID recovery, after they go home, at home, they need up 2 to 4 liters of oxygen at night, nocturnal oxygen, for anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks, sometimes up to 6 weeks. We are seeing that phenomenon. So that is the lung COVID which you are saying. And then is the endothelial COVID. So I would classify your multi-system COVID as the endothelial COVID, which the endothelial COVID is the place for NOACs. It's a place for your low molecular heparins for 3 months. While the lung COVID is the one which will probably need steroids, probably need a lot of nebulization, chest physiotherapy, Chyawanprash, immunomodulation, so on and so forth. So that's how COVID sequelae are being seen now.
So Perfinex or Pirfenidone is another drug. So normally what we tell people is you buy a peak flow meter and let the patient keep his peak flow meter best and try to achieve and see whether he has a residual damage or not. So peak flow meter with SpO2 should be able to give him a good lung rehabilitation program at home. All such cases need a good lung rehabilitation. For them, the only 2 equipment required is SpO2, 6-minute walk test they do, and they see whether their oxygen is still falling or not, and they see their lung capacity by peak flow meter. Coming back to the last couple of discussion, can we come back to the slide number 2 again? Rikuji? And before the slide comes, I want to talk about fatigue. Characteristics of this disease is fatigue during and after fatigue. How do you handle the fatigue in such cases? Dr. Joshi, fatigue and fatigue.
So fatigue can be 2 types. One is biological fatigue and second is mental fatigue.
Next.
So the biological fatigue is The biological fatigue
और ऊपर
often needs, coenzyme Q,
और ऊपर एक
often
सेकंड मैं
needs some
स्लाइड ले लूंगा और ऊपर 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 सेकंड सेकंड
N-acetylcysteine.
स्लाइड सेकंड
वो
स्लाइड
पीछे जाइए.
हाँ ये
हाँ.
हाँ बस छोड़ दो हाँ
So the biological fatigue is the one which will need, biological fatigue has some what I call residual, just like you have the residual heart risk. I call it the residual cytokine overlay. And that chronic fatigue, which has a chronic inflammatory state, which is, in a state of stasis. As I said, these are the wounds which are there. That fatigue might need N-acetylcysteine, might need some form of a Chyawanprash, might need some form of coenzyme Q, and probably the biological fatigue is a very tough nut to crack, where there is a lot of neuromuscular syndrome which is seen. The mental fatigue is equally common, and often both of them coexist. The primary reason in mental syndrome is because most people suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, and COVID is one of the classical examples of post-traumatic stress disorder, which leads to fatigue. So we need to distinguish biological fatigue from mental fatigue, and mental fatigue can be handled by a good cognitive behavioral therapy or antidepressants or some good or neuropsychiatric drugs. While biological fatigue can, again, if there is residual cytokine overlay, then some of these drugs like mefenamic acid, maybe even occasionally if the fatigue and pain, there's a pain component of the fatigue, maybe a small dose of nimesulide for a few days might be useful. But fatigue can be very distressing, protracted, and troublesome.
remember the word fatigue, the definition of fatigue, which may end up into a CFS, which is a chronic fatigue syndrome. But for that, we need a 6 months of fatigue. So therefore, we still can't tell them as a CFS. But fatigue means not relieved by rest. So if you have a fatigue not relieved by rest, you start looking for a pathological fatigue. Normally, when you exercise, you should get after rest within half an hour, your fatigue should disappear. But here, the fatigue lasts longer than that, and you say this is a pathological fatigue. So let me revise today what we have discussed with Professor Shashank Joshi. I've taken all the questions which have come from our viewers into my presentations, into my talks already. With that, so thank you for all the people who have joined here. So prevent if you can, prevent, and prevent COVID-19. Till vaccine is available, we know that correct, consistent use of masking is the prevention. The second thing is that if you get it, don't worry. Diagnose early. If you diagnose it by day 3 or day 5, if you can, first of all, day 0, try to see whether you have already a cytokine axis in your body by CRP. If your CRP is between 1 and 3, you know that you have an excess of cytokines in the body. Try to build up a anti-cytokine lifestyle that I call them as anti-inflammatory lifestyle with diet, sleep, and everything. And then if you develop the disease, look for a differential diagnosis. One diagnosis which we haven't covered, I just will cover in my talk, is TB, because TB, हर COVID में TB ढूंढो, हर TB में COVID ढूंढो is the Government of India slogan. That TB can also be a low-grade infection. It can also be an evening rise infection. It can also have an unexplained switching. And it can also have a lung lesion. It can also have a rise in CRP and a rise in TB. So don't forget, and the Government of India says that COVID tests and TB tests are done free in the government sectors. So if you go to a COVID test, they will invariably do a TB test also in your swab and rule out tuberculosis. And the government has said 14% of their samples in corona, they have seen coexisting tuberculosis. If you have corona, look for, is it pure simple corona, or it is a coexisting disease, or it is only some other disease than corona, being in the winter season. But if you have corona, mind it, it's not fever, it's fever with inflammation. It's not inflammation, it is hyperinflammation. Hyperinflammation needs to be suppressed, cytokine needs to be suppressed. Therefore, you have a choice. And when we have calculated ourselves between paracetamol, naproxen, indomethacin, mefenamic acid, and nimesulide, we are of the opinion for first 14 days, because of a rapid action, Nimesulide and mefenamic acid will compete with each other depending upon your preferences. And after 14 days, if you want to get it for 3 months, then mefenamic acid will be the drug of choice in such a situation. Fatigue, again, you may need anti-inflammatory. So remember the formula. By day 10, bring your CRP to less than 10, and by 28, bring your CRP to less than 2.8, and that's 3. So remember the formula of day 10. Day 10 is the time when your virus becomes non-replicative. Make sure that your CRP is less than 10. That means it's recovering. And day 28 is the time when you expect your antibodies have formed. Bring your CRP to less than 2.8, which is less than 3, which means you have shifted from inflammation to mild inflammation, and then by day 90, aim it to bring it to less than 1. So by the day 90, when you go into a non-COVID phase, your CRP should be back than 1. By day 28, should be less than 2.8. And by day 10, it should be less than 10. If you treat now, start thinking about cytokine, start thinking of TNF alpha, start thinking of IL-6. So whenever you ask anybody, somebody comes forward and say, this drug is good, you ask him whether it increases good cytokines or not, whether it reduces bad cytokines or not. Like a good cholesterol and a bad cholesterol, you have good cytokines and a bad cytokine. I will request now in the last Professor Joshi to give 5 take-home messages.
So as Dr. Agarwal has rightfully said that COVID is a big mimic, and the first 10 days of COVID, there is active replication of the virus, where the virus is at the supreme. But after that, it is all inflammation, hyperinflammation, and the immunology takes over. And this inflammation can last for 3 months, for 6 months. And we spoke of fatigue, we spoke of inflammation. Anti-inflammatory drugs are the only drugs on planet Earth which are far more effective, not only for symptom control, but also to save lives. We have seen, starting from steroids with various monoclonal antibodies and simple anti-inflammatory drugs, whether it could be a simple drug like a simple nimesulide, can actually also make a difference in COVID care. COVID care is a lot of common sense. The only thing which works in COVID is oxygen, prone position, and supportive care. All other therapies are in research mode. But in the research mode, inflammation is a big component, and so is infection. Never forget, today's whole theme was in COVID, never forget associated co-infections. And whenever we are looking at associated co-infections, whether it is a dengue, whether it is a malaria, whether it's leptospira, chikungunya, everything, as Dr. Agarwal has very nicely tried to collate, never forget that we could always be having another co-infection, which is very, very easily treatable. All the drugs with COVID are repurposed. Anti-inflammatories are easy, cheap, effective, and can be used. And if the pain predominates, inflammation predominates, CRP predominates, a simple drug which acts quick like nimesulide can actually reduce the bad cytokines, improve the good cytokines. And mefenamic acid can be continued if it keeps lingering beyond 2 weeks. That's the take-home message for today. Thank you, Dr. Agarwal, for having me once again with you. And I think I learn a lot whenever I interact with you, because your pearls of wisdom over the last 3 decades, I'm your student and I'm very proud to be your student.
Thank you, Professor Joshi. But remember one thing, when we are talking about cytokines, there are also mental cytokines, as Professor Joshi has said. And that gives us a happy Navratri from tomorrow. In this Navratri, you can practice a cytokine, anti-cytokine diet, and anti-cytokine mental diet. So remember that if you really do a good Navratri, go back to a fasting, 50% fasting, less diet, more of a fruit diet, dry fruits you can take, and control all your negativity in the mind in 9 days. Get your CRP done today and take it for granted after 9 days, your CRP will be lower. So all those people who are practicing and celebrating Navratris, get your CRP done before and after and show a change that yes, holistic treatment also makes a difference. That's all for today. We'll be back with one more seminar I thank Dr. Shashank Joshi to be here. It was lovely having him with me. Thank you very much. Stay tuned. We'll be back. Namaskar.